So I'm recording again. So good morning. If you're watching the video for this, I'm Dr. John Saunders, a lecturer in the Communication Arts Department here at UAH. And this is another one of our guest speakers for the class Public Memory and Race in the South. So today we have Madeline Burkhardt, who is the Adult Education Coordinator and Curator for the Rosa Parks Museum at Troy University. And she's going to be talking about what all is going on with the Rosa Parks Museum, as well as how race plays a part in the commemoration of everything that they're trying to do at the museum. So with that, Madeline, I will turn it over to you.
You'd think I'd be better at Zoom by now, right? With it being like a year into this. Give me 1 second. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm good. Sorry. So I'm actually in the museum right now, if you guys haven't figured that out. So good morning, guys. I work at the Rosa Parks Museum. Like Dr. Saunders said, I'm located at the site where Rosa Parks was arrested in 1955. So what's really, really special about here is that we're at the site she was arrested at, and we also have this huge bus, which is behind me, that's inside the museum, and we do a whole reenactment of her arrest. And so if you were standing like over back in there, it would just look like you were outside of our front doors the evening of December 1st, 1955. So that's part of it. I brought my tripod to move you guys around if you don't mind being moved around and being a little rocky in here. So we've been open since 2000, and the software we run here, while it's great, it is this room is spectacular. Before I go back in here, just keep in mind that the software we're running is Windows 98. So it is only 5 years younger than me, which is pretty crazy to be working here and having something that old still be functioning. Guess we could pull up Microsoft Paint on it if we really wanted to. This time of year, with it being Black History Month just having ended and it being Women's History Month, we usually get about 600 to 800 people a day. And a lot of those, 90% of those, are 10-year-olds that are coming from different schools in Alabama. Right now, we're getting about 6 people a day because of COVID. So our numbers have just shot down recently. So what we've been trying to do is get more of our stuff online. And it's been a struggle because we're a really small museum. We have a full-time staff of about, I think 5 of us right now. So we're pretty small. And I'm usually the one running the camera and then working the laptop at the same time. And of course, there are always technological issues that you can't plan for and things like that. So we're doing tours that way. They're all free, which is another kind of issue for us that we can't really figure out because we have lost a lot of money, as other museums have over the past year. We've also started putting a lot of our police records and collections stuff just online and on Facebook for people to access. And that's been a really big deal because of everything that happened last year. And me saying that doesn't even encompass, there have, of course, been protests before, Black Lives Matter protests before last year. But last year seems to be a lot larger of a movement than what we had been seeing for a while. And so people started turning to us and being like, you need to make a statement, or, how are you going to address this? And we're in a little bit of a tricky situation because we are owned and operated by a state-run university. So we can't be political. But what myself and my colleague believe here, and we believe this very strongly, is that civil rights are not political. It's not our fault that they have been made political. They're just human rights. And if you want to make it political, that's your own thing, but they're not. And so we have been able to use our collection, use parts of this museum to speak about that, because we get a lot of visitors who come in, they see our Black Lives Matter shirts in the gift shop and things like that, and they get mad because they're like, Rosa Parks would never support Black Lives Matter. Like, what are you doing? And we correct them. Usually, you know, we can't speak for her, of course, but using kind of the context clues we have, she wasn't like that meek, middle-aged woman who was just tired, right? Like, she was a spitfire. She was well involved in activism before the bus boycott and well after. And so y'all are a public memory class, and you are talking about gender too. So there's a lot of sexism that happens in the civil rights movement. And one thing that, or a big thing that I wish we did a better job of here, was actually talking about Rosa Parks outside of the boycott. We pretty much just like you come in the front room, give you an introduction to like Montgomery and 55 and segregation, and then we move you in here to the bus boycott. We don't talk about how she was the sexual assault investigator for the NAACP. We don't talk about how she helped raise money for the defense fund for the Scottsboro boys. We don't talk about how when she was little, she said she would rather be lynched than have her rights taken away from her. So she wasn't, you know, that quiet woman that a lot of people think she was. And then at the end of the museum, we end it with her getting an award by President Clinton. And we don't talk about how she was on the board for Planned Parenthood. We don't talk about how she worked for John Conyers. We don't talk about the fact that even though she fled north, you know, of course, racism is still up there, and she couldn't find a job, and the CEO of Little Caesars had to pay for her groceries and for her rent for a long time. Like, there's a lot that we leave out about the actual woman. So that to me is something that we would like to do in the future. We are in the very, 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 very beginning stages of redoing everything here. And kind of along those lines is the fact that a lot of the women of the Montgomery bus boycott have never been talked about. And I think that kind of speaks to a little bit of sexism, because everyone wants to talk about Dr. King. Everyone wants to talk about, you know, Reverend Abernathy, and they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But women like Joanne Robinson, Georgia Gilmore, Jean Gratz, Juanita Abernathy, they were all just as important. And even Claudette Colvin, who I'm sorry I haven't mentioned before now, but you know, we don't talk about them here at all, really. But I guess I can take you guys through. Do y'all have any questions before I move on through the museum at all? If you do, just like unmute yourself, because I'm on my phone, so I can't see like everybody's screen. Okay, so I'm gonna flip this. All right, cool. So this is the bus, right? So it's an original 1955 Montgomery line bus. It's not like quote unquote the bus, but it is a bus that would have been running at that same time that she probably rode at some point. Okay, we talk about Joanne Robinson right here. And that's about it. So she was, and we also do in the videos as well, but if you were just to come in and walk through like today or Juneteenth when we turn the videos off, you're not getting much information about her. But we talk about the 52,000 flyers she printed out with others. Yeah, so then we take you through like Holt Street Baptist Church to kind of look like you're at one of those mass meetings. And I guess another thing that I would like to point out and that you will see as you move through here is there, to me, my personal opinion, there is not enough description of the terror and the violence that was happening then. A lot of civil rights museums, when they were built, like at this time, so like the 2000s or maybe even a little earlier, and a lot of textbooks, they talk about this being super peaceful, which it was on one end. They don't talk about, like, for example, like, okay, here's, you know, a mass meeting, and then I'm gonna walk back this way. We don't talk about how these people are inciting terror and bombing people's houses and shooting at buses and, you know, running people out of town. And I think that needs to be talked about a little bit more, because just to say that this was a super peaceful movement, it almost takes away from the fact that the boycotters and the foot soldiers participate, like they had to have so much bravery and so much courage just to even walk the streets here at that time. Alrighty, so we do have some original documents here. Most of them are actually in my office right now, but these have been here since 2000 when we opened. These cases, this is like a little museum fact, I guess, for you, but they are not sealed. There's no acid-free backing in here. There's no humidity control. So these are going to need some serious TLC whenever we redo this space. That's one thing that I really, really want to do, is do some of that. So these screens here, I turn them off because they will sometimes just turn themselves on occasionally, and they're the ones running Windows 98, and we have a bunch of oral histories from people who were here at that time, and they do talk about like the mass meetings, the carpooling, how they got to work, what schools were like then, and things like that. And that's pretty well done, like to hear it firsthand from people who were there. That's always a good thing, especially now, because, you know, everyone's starting to die that was alive back then and participated in the movement. Like Reverend Robert Gratz and his wife Jeannie just passed away this past winter, and I was pretty close with them, and they're mentioned in the museum. But all right, so we have a scary wax figure here of Dr. King. It's a really well done, like, wax figure though. It's super realistic. The students really love it. This is just depicting him having coffee, and it's like his epiphany scene, which happened in late January of 1956. So we instantly kind of like come in, we do the boycott. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words. I haven't had coffee today. We do the bus, we talk about Rosa Parks a little bit, and then it's just like Dr. King all here is Dr. King. Which again, I'm not saying we don't need to talk about him, but we're called the Rosa Parks Museum, and there's only like 2 mentions of Rosa Parks in the museum. We do have some like blown up photos from the bombing of Dr. King's house. So we do have that, if reference to like the terror. Another thing that we don't talk about too much, and this goes along with the women issue, are the legal battles that were going on. So if you're going to have a movement, right, you can't just protest things and expect it to change. You have to have people fighting on the legal side as well. So we mentioned Browder versus Gale like pretty soon on, but it's just this paragraph or a few paragraphs on it, and then we don't really talk about it anymore. And that's the case that ended bus segregation in Montgomery and, you know, nationwide. So I think that's really important, because we just gloss over that, but Rosa Parks wasn't a plaintiff on that case. So yes, her bravery and her refusal to give up her seat helped start this boycott, which helped Browder v. Gale come into play. But she wasn't one of the women who actually faced the court system and had segregation overturned. And we just mentioned it like right here. And this is the whole thing that, ended the boycott, was the court case. So see, we've even got like the men of Montgomery. And there's not one that says the women of Montgomery. Just saying. I'm not here to like drag the museum at all. Like there are some good things, but I'm also, we're Women's History Month, and we like to talk about the women that were involved because they've been behind the scenes for way too long. So we have a focus again on the men. So I'm not going to focus on that too long. We move on to the mass arrest, which I think we do an all right job of that. The only bad thing with this is that we have all of the names listed, but the person that did this display put them in alphabetical order. They're not standing in alphabetical order. So you might as well have just not put the names there, because these are unknown figures now, because so many of them have died and don't have family members here anymore. Like we obviously know this is Rosa Parks, this is Dr. King, this is Joanne Robinson, but I don't know who Mrs. R.T. Adair is in this photo. And I think that's kind of problematic, because kind of erasing them from this narrative by not naming who they are, when we do have the names here, where that would have been a simple thing to do at the time, just to match up who each person was. Let's see, what else? I'm definitely not trashing this place. But here's another critique of mine, is we have this one section on police, and okay, so I'm going to do my best not to get political. And we all know the conversations that were happening last summer and last year. We all know what the police did in 55 and 56, right? Like they were not the good guys. We had people tweet at us, message us, whatever, and say, oh, but the police in the civil rights movement weren't brutal. So I think we're doing a little bit of a disservice by not talking about how messed up how messed up it is that they are getting into people's bank accounts and looking at money, and how they are infiltrating homes and mass meetings and things like that. So this is something I think we definitely need to touch on more. And not, again, I'm not saying that every police officer is bad, but if you're talking about the general, like overall attitude of 55 and 56, it was that of oppression by any means necessary, whether it be water hoses or surveillance or dogs. And so we tried to speak a little bit to that, because there are some quotes by Rosa Parks on police brutality. We have documents that show, exactly what they were doing, and how the language is very similar then to what was being told now. And it was well received by the public. But again, that's something we have to be careful of, because there were people in our organization who aren't with the museum necessarily, but who were saying, you can't tell that narrative. You need to also tell the narrative of how the police helped the boycott. I don't know of that narrative. If you guys do, go ahead and correct me on that, but I haven't heard of that. And it's not like we're trying to, pick a side and do it. Again, we don't believe that civil rights should be political. It's just the fact of the matter is that's how it's become. So here we have like a mirror, like you're among the marchers or protesters. And we just have like these little blurbs that kind of like move you on through the 382 days. So real quick overview of 382 days. We do talk about Jeannie Gratz and their bombing and Georgia Gilmore. Their photos are tiny. And I guess I'm going back to like that whole Men of the Movement thing or Men of Montgomery. When you've got like, bam, like there's a really large photo of the police, but that's a thumbnail. Okay, I'm not, but sorry. Okay, so we do have an original car here too, which is really great. And I do love the way the wax figures are done. Like they are very realistic. They're in action. They put a great backdrop here because this was one of the carpool pickup locations and it was one of the more popular ones. So this is something like you would have seen in 55, 56. So this is really well done, I think. Oh, here's one of our screens. I don't know if you guys can see it. So I don't really want to press on one, but so it's not fitting the monitor anymore because, you know, Windows 98. But we do have some that go over police surveillance and then flight support, which there was some, but like when we were talking about the play, and Dr. Saunders was talking about the play that kids did earlier, there wasn't overwhelming white support at all, just, you know, a few people. So that would just play. It's really loud too, so the sound quality is great, but if you were in here doing a tour and we've got walk-ins who may be here and then we're back in that area doing a guided tour, then sometimes it's hard to hear what the guide is saying. So this right here is like the 382 days. And then we're at the end. So we're here at the end and we've got more wax figures who, like, seriously though, the detail I really like. This is just like a museum thing, but this is just to represent the victory ride. So for the end of the bus boycott. It scares little kids sometimes, but you know, it's what it is. I like to use that to my advantage if we're dealing with unruly students. Then I'll come around the corner and tell them that they come alive if you misbehave in the museum and you don't want to get on Dr. King's bad side. So I use that to my advantage. We do have these little stops around here, and it's like a stop sign with a bus. And these are meant for kids. So this is about the victory ride. But this is also about the victory ride. So it's just a way of kind of condensing the information for kids. Looks like we just have kind of the kids stuff on this one, but moving on from that. This is where we kind of start making an effort to talk about something other than the boycott in Rosa Parks' life. So we have this Labor Day weekend at Communist Training School flyer, and it's about Highlander Folk School. So again, we could do something with that because that language is very similar to today, right? Like these people are going to a nonviolence training camp. They were for equality. They're definitely communist. You know, you're fighting for equality. That's the label you're going to get. And it was a very bad label then. It's still not great now, but it was worse to be called that then than now, I would say. So we start to get into a little bit of that here at the very end, but that's all. And it's just like this little paragraph. Nope, that's not even it. Don't listen to me. This is on segregated bus stops. I thought it was there. So we don't even have anything to describe like, hey, that's not actually a communist training school. So, you know, kids could come in and not have an understanding of propaganda. And they would just say, oh, Rosa Parks went to a communist training school. Right. And then we also start to make a little bit of an effort here to connect it to other events. So we go through like the Freedom Rides, the March on Washington, Luther King's assassination, the March on Selma to Montgomery, just photos from that, because the Montgomery bus boycott did inspire so many other protests. I mean, even modern day, like the Women's March on Washington or the March for Our Lives and things like that. And then we always end our groups here. And this is just a video of her receiving the medal from President Clinton. And that's kind of the museum. So I think, this was built when I was, how old was I? Like 7 years old. So obviously I wouldn't have had any say in anything that happened here. But if I were to now, and again, you'll correct me if I'm way off on this, because I am speaking from a white female perspective, and I usually try to acknowledge that in all of my tours. There's not enough of the tension. It's just a lot of these wonderful people did this very peacefully, and yay, they succeeded, and segregation was no more. But that's not just us either. I've seen that in a lot of other, history museums too. And it's something that a lot of places now are reckoning with. There's another little thumbnail of Georgia Gilmore. But then there's men. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna stop at that. All right. Do you have any questions at all so far? I'm gonna walk back here and get my.
I have a question.
Sure.
So we've talked about in our class how museums have kind of this limit as to what they can display because of physical space and because you could only keep people's attention so long. Do you think moving online, you guys have more room to tell more of the women's stories or more of the untold more of the untold stories?
Yes, definitely. The only hiccup with that is, I don't know if y'all have talked to a museum that's university owned yet. There's a difference between like for-profit museums, nonprofit museums, state-run museums, university-run museums, things like that. So a lot of the times, those entities that own a museum that aren't just the museum itself, like if it's not just a board of people that own it and operate it, they don't necessarily understand how to run it aside from it being a business. So we've been having a couple of issues with trying to put this material online because, there's pushback. Well, if you put that on there, why will people come visit? They're not going to come if you put everything online. And, I beg to differ with that because we have 150 plus police records and we have maybe like 7 on display. So there's more that they can see, right? So I do think not just online, but I've been kind of getting around that hurdle by using social media instead of putting it just on our website. Because this is not going to change. This has been up since 2000. We haven't even rotated out documents. Like, this is it. This bus is staying here forever and ever because the museum was built around this bus. So it was put here and then the walls were added. So like, this bad boy is staying right here. So in terms of our space, we're going to actually play around with that a lot though, once we start the next phase of this new kind of reimagining this exhibition, we're going to take down a lot of walls. They're actually going to take away the art exhibition space that I have right now for visiting artists. They're going to take that away to add on to this. So there can be just a section on like the women of the movement. Another thing that we've been doing that isn't online is that we were awarded a grant to fund 2 temporary exhibitions that we can ship anywhere in the nation for free. And one deals with those women of the movement and Browder versus Gale, and then the other focuses on Rosa Parks' life. So even though we're super, super limited here, I guess to the point where you can't even say limited, like we just can't change anything in here. We do have a lot more freedom, either online or with those temporary exhibits. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Well, we have talked about the like with monuments and memorials, the people who created it had an interest in what it's trying to commemorate and how it's trying to commemorate. And we have talked about the issue of museums are a little different in that there's a financial concern that monuments and memorials don't have. So yes, I mean, we totally get the idea that some people see this as a business and look at it primarily from the financial point of view, as opposed to the here's what happened in history and here's how we're trying to interpret that history for contemporary audiences.
Right. I guess I know I am really radical. Yes. I'm very socially liberal. As a person, I'm not speaking as the museum or institution right now, and I'm saying that right now. I don't think it is fair for a majority white institution with fully white male leadership to profit off of a Black museum. That's me personally. So if somebody emails me and they're like, I want to go through the museum, you know, if it's just a random person, like, no. But if it's a kid that needs help on a project, sure. Again, that was me not speaking as the museum or as this institution. That was me very personally saying that, because that can get me in trouble. I do think it's a great thing that, you know, a primarily white organization saw the need for a space like this. I do think that's great, because it was just going to be a parking lot before they realized that this was the site where she was arrested. So that's wonderful. But to just see us as a money-making machine and not somewhere that can educate, especially with, well, I mean, the climate we've always been in, but with things coming to that massive, massive head last year, you know, is just not ethically right to me personally. And I have gotten in trouble for that, and I will own up to that I have gotten in trouble for doing things like that. So yeah, that's just my issue with it. Like, I understand wanting to make money, sure, why not? That's great. But I'm also of the belief that if it is educational material, I don't think it's right to penalize those that can't afford to come, because museums have always been known as an institution of privilege, especially of white privilege. Art museums have had that for like the longest time, and contemporary art museums are fighting that even harder to some extent. Because with contemporary art, you already have like the privilege aspect, but then you have the aspect of, this is really modern and contemporary, I don't understand it, so I'm not going to go. Whereas if you just go to like regular art museum, you know, there's a still life, like everyone kind of knows what that is, but also, those are white dominated spaces. And what am I getting at? Yeah, so the whole idea of museums as being money-making institutions is not one that I'm a fan of. I like how England does theirs, where everything is pretty much just on donation basis, I believe. Everywhere that I went in England was free. Again, England's got its own problems, right? Like the whole British Museum is not British. So, but also they're not charging for you to go see stuff that's not theirs. Now I'm on my soapbox, but yeah, I get it. And we're not getting donations. Like, we don't have a development team here. If we get donations, it's either because myself or my colleague is begging people, honestly, on our virtual tours. So we don't have a development office. I think if we could get to the point where we're getting donations, we can maybe get away from being somewhere that is paid. And even like public schools, we don't have a discount for them when they come. Oh, hello. I got a comment on here. Yeah, so especially like this kind of history, I think it does suck for people who can't afford to see it, because it's different from just going to like not to like knock on historic house museums at all, but it's a little different coming here and learning stuff as opposed to just going to like a historic house and learning about their silverware or their china collection, so to me, I do love historic house museums though. So
Well, and
any
one
other?
thing that's interesting there in Montgomery is the fact that you have like the EGI, the Legacy Museum, you have the Civil Rights Memorial, the Rosa Parks Museum, and all of that's not too far away from the first White House of the Confederacy.
Mm-hmm.
And even, and I noticed this when I lived in Montgomery for a few years, even aesthetically, if you walk around downtown Montgomery, it's a very white space. I mean, just aesthetically.
Oh yeah.
So there's all of these ways in which race is being a primary element of the space and what's adjacent to spaces there in Montgomery. So a lot of the things you're talking about, I think, fit the city in a larger sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like back in the 20s, the first I guess I can't even say 20s anymore since like 2020, but 1920s, the first White House of the Confederacy was actually located originally like right behind where the museum is now. So in the 20s, when you've got all of that Jim Crow nonsense going on, they upped it and moved it to be right beside the Capitol building. That was purposeful, right? Like, you don't just decide I'm going to move this house for no reason. And it's just like Confederate monuments too. Like, they're all there just for oppression, like point blank. And like 90% of them are still facing north because they're staring down the enemy. And so we have that, but I encourage people who are not from the South to go visit the first White House of the Confederacy while they're here, because I think that gives them a more complete narrative. Because I've seen a lot of people who come to the South, and I call them like pity tours. So they come here and they're like, I just came like to see the racism and segregation here. We don't have that in Boston. Like, that's never been a problem in Boston. And we can't believe it. And I encourage them to go there to learn about like the Confederacy and how it was just a war on slavery. It wasn't the war of northern aggression or whatever. And definitely come to all the civil rights sites, but you need to understand the ground you're standing on with these civil rights sites just to be warehouses where slaves were held before they were sent to market. Like our children's wing is sitting on a spot like that. The whole city is just riddled with this traumatic, dark history. And it's been so buried. And if you don't talk about that, if you leave it with these whitewashed buildings, you're not doing yourself any good at all. And I think that's a main like tourism problem too for the South, is that people are scared to come here. Like I've talked to some Black women on virtual tours who have said, I'm so glad you're doing this because I don't feel safe enough coming to Alabama. And it's 2021. And we just have that reputation too. So if your downtown is playing into that reputation, it's not a good look. So I think though our new mayor is making a lot of strides with toning that down quite a bit. Like there is a new Rosa Parks statue. We're actually going to get a new Rosa Parks statue outside the museum this winter. They put a Black Lives Matter mural around the fountain where the auction used to be. First White House Confederacy is of course still there. I'm of the opinion, not to destroy things, but just to reconfigure them in a way that isn't glorifying them, in an educational way and moving them from, prominence. But it's still there. And actually, so funny story, the First White House of Confederacy actually really loves to partner with us for events, and for our Juneteenth event specifically. They really jumped at the chance to have a booth here to let people know, hey, this was wrong, and we're going to tell you it's wrong if you come to the museum. We're not trying to tell you, gone with the wind up here or anything. And people avoided that booth and got kind of mad that the First White House of Confederacy was there for good reason. But also, I think there's something to be said that they are really wanting to kind of change that narrative there too and tell a more complete story.
Well, and that's something we talked about with the Stax Museum that we had a presentation from last week. The fact that there's not just one truth or two truths, there's multiple truths for every story. And so with the Montgomery bus boycott, it isn't just a black and white issue. There's not just two truths there. There's multiple truths. And if you think about things that are in and around Montgomery, there's so many different stories that can't be boiled down to, well, here are the stories of the African Americans, here's the stories of the white people. It's not that simple.
Right.
And that's where a lot of like museums, especially older museums, can get kind of stuck in a binary like that. Whereas now it seems there's more of a trend to break away from that binary, to tell the stories of real people and these multiple truths.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I wanted to ask, you talked about the trauma, the tension that is not currently represented. Do you think the presence of the EJI and the Legacy Museum, which are both based on trauma, do you think that's creating a trend to where now more places can talk about that trauma and that tension that existed, as opposed to these binaries or these kind of whitewashed safe histories?
I think they've helped, but even before EJI, you had the Whitney plantation that was doing that. Um, I'm not like, I hate to even use the word trend and be like, we are here to emotionally scar everyone that comes in. Like, that's what we want to do. And I hate even when people say that changing the narrative is a trend, because that implies that you're not going to do it after a while. Like, you're just gonna, it's hot right now and it's going to go away. But I think that definitely helped, especially in this area. Because you go to somewhere like that and you see the horrors, and they do a really good job. If y'all haven't been to the Legacy Museum, highly encourage you to. They do a really good job of having newspaper clippings and like written stories from both the white and the black perspective in this one area of the museum. And I think that is something that's pretty, crucial, because I think it's important to acknowledge that, the bus driver that Rosa Parks had, she had encounters with him before that weren't great. And he died saying that he was only doing his job. So you need to acknowledge that, but also acknowledge, hey, that's, even though that's your job, there's like man's law and then more of like an ethical moral law. And I think, we don't want to traumatize people when they come in here, but I do think that HAI has kind of opened the door to that here, because I would say the rest of us play it pretty safe, like us in the Civil Rights Museum with SBLC and Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Like, we all are, it ended, it was peaceful, cool, like segregation, racism, we're done with it. It doesn't say that anywhere, but that's, that's kind of the general feeling. Like, when you leave here, you feel like a good person learning about Rosa Parks and Dr. King and everything. And you forget that he was murdered, shot down for his beliefs. You'll think about that in Memphis if you go to the hotel, but like here, you don't even think about that. You just think about that nonviolent man and all that peace that was in the city and these kind of foot soldiers for justice. And I'm not trying to knock that at all, because I do think that you need to have that feeling too. But like yesterday was the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. They tried 2 times before they eventually made that final march here. And we talk about Bloody Sunday and we talk about that final march from Selma to Montgomery. When we mention Bloody Sunday, a lot of times people are just saying like, this is commemoration of Bloody Sunday. We don't say, they were brutally attacked with billy clubs by state troopers who were waiting on them. Or I think it's all about language too. And I think that plays into the trauma, because you can go somewhere like with us, a lot of the reason why Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat was because she was remembering Emmett Till's murder, lynching in her head, and how his mother looked over his casket. And if I'm with a group of kids, I'll just like gloss over it like that if they're younger. But if they're older, I think you should say exactly how he was found, with barbed wire around him, brutally, brutally disfigured. And you don't need to gloss over stuff like that, because it's just, I guess the reasoning is kind of something that we talk about in here, which is the 1921 statute that was a law in 55, which was that you cannot boycott or protest without just cause. And so if you're glossing over Emmett Till's murder and lynching, if you're glossing over the fact that buses were shot at or whatever, you're going to think that they were boycotting without just cause, just that, oh, they weren't being treated fairly. But it was more than that. They were being killed too. And just okay, sorry, that just went off. But yeah, I do think I do think EJI has really paved the way with for us to do that. And we do, and it depends on your staff too. I will say that museums really depend on their staff. You do have your directors, you do have your board members, you have those, but people who come into the museum are going to be interacting with the education department, the front of house people, not so much curators, but maybe. And if you've got a good staff, which I feel like we have right now, if I can say that, we're going to talk about that. And it doesn't matter necessarily what was put here in 2000, because we can still include that, you know, in the narrative when we walk through here. We may just not have like the documents or photos to back it up, but yeah.
When you brought up Rosa Parks thinking about Emmett Till, one of our speakers was an author of a book called Remembering Emmett Till, and he's co-director of the Emmett Till Memory Project. And he talked about how there was speculation that Rosa Parks was thinking of Emmett Till, but there's no proof that she ever actually said that. Do you have any evidence that she was thinking about Emmett Till?
It's mentioned in her biography, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. And I know that may not be like concrete, but oh gosh, now you put me on the spot. I do know it's in that book, and we've talked about that, but it's kind of also like the issue with her participating with as a sexual assault investigator. She never said that she was sexually assaulted, but people say that she was, because she was at a house and a white man and the white neighbor came over, and she was able to get away from him. So she wasn't ever sexually assaulted, and she never said she was, but people say that she decided to help out with the NAACP with that branch because of her past experience. But she never said that, but I guess it was true. But I think it's in The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. I'm like 90% sure it is. You can ask Dr. Theo Harris where she got it from. Because we do tell people that. And it could also be one of those things where I'm not 100% certain, but this museum was made when Rosa Parks was alive, and she did have input on it. And the designers and historians talked to her quite a bit. So it could just be one of those like small things too. I'm not sure of where somebody just talked to her and nobody wrote it down anywhere and just got passed down. But it may not be true. Maybe we should stop saying. Maybe we should stop saying. He would know probably better than me.
Well, it's interesting because this is something she would have known about.
Wait a second. Hold on. Okay, so we actually said that on Twitter. We brought up Emmett Till on the 65th anniversary, and the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation liked my tweet and commented under it and like kind of affirmed it. But also that's Twitter. But I do remember that whole thing because I was just so happy that we were having kind of like a little back and forth dialogue with him on social media, because I think it's cool when museums talk to each other on social media, but especially to have, you know, those two kind of sites come together. Because I think I tweeted something like, and on this anniversary, you know, I think the Emmett Till Foundation like retweeted something, and then I responded to them, something like that, and said, you know, and of course on this anniversary we recognize that Mrs. Parks was thinking about Emmett Till, and so they liked it and commented under it. But again, that doesn't mean it's true. But
Well, I think it actually shows some of the interconnectedness of the things that we're talking about in this class, that especially with the civil rights movement, what happened in the Mississippi Delta wasn't isolated from what's happened in Alabama, or things that have happened in Memphis or in Atlanta or other places like that. These events haven't been in vacuums, that there's this connectedness that they all have together. And so I may put Dave Tell in touch with you to, especially
Yeah,
since he's co-director of the Emmett Till Memory Project. You know, it's something that
right.
as many collaborations as we can build out of this, the better, because the more we talk with each other, the more enlightened and the more connections we can build, the better things are going to be for everybody.
Yeah. And I think another interesting thing to talk about with those sites and the interconnectivity is, like, you know, back in the day in Europe, people did pilgrimages to different sites. And I kind of see that here, where people will go on these like civil rights pilgrimages, and they'll either start in Memphis or in Atlanta, and they'll do Ebenezer Baptist Church, they'll do Dr. King's house. Then they'll do the new museum there that's by the World of Coke, who's the name I always get wrong. And then they'll come over to us. They'll do these sites. They'll do Selma. They'll go up to Birmingham, and then they'll go to Memphis or something. And that's a very common path that a lot of people take. And I mean, I would kind of call it a pilgrimage, and because there are some people who are older and who are white and who were either maybe from here and moved off, or just, you know, not from here but remember hearing of it, and they feel like it's their duty almost to walk or to go along that path and learn about the things that they didn't have a chance to learn about then. But we also have a lot of Black family reunion groups that do the same thing too. So we're almost like a pilgrimage site, I would say.
Well, we've covered a lot. Are there any other questions any of you have?
I just wanted to say I appreciated going through the museum with you, because I appreciated like we've been doing critical lenses, talking about them a lot, and I appreciated the lens that you offered, not just telling us what was in the museum, but adding to it, like, you know, this is where I think some stuff could be added, and it was created 20 years ago. I really appreciated that. I love learning like more about how all of that's created and how you can't necessarily take museums at face value of what they present. So thank you for doing that. That was awesome.
Sure, no problem. I'm really good at being critical. That's what gets me in trouble a lot of times. But yeah, it was created 20 years ago by mostly white male developers. So I didn't say that then, but I think that plays a big role in it as well.
Well, and being the ones in control of that narrative, that also plays to the safety of the story. And then if you think about audience, I mean, who was the target audience 20 years ago? That's probably not the same target audience as the museum has now.
Depends on who you ask too, because, like, you know, most of our visitors that come here or came here BC before COVID, it was either like white middle-aged, like retirees, or Black African American families. We also had quite a few people from like Germany and England, and a lot from Canada. So we get a lot of international visitors. But like, if you were to ask like myself or my colleague, we really want to target the people who refuse to come here. So like the neo-Confederates and the people who are still segregationists and who would never, ever, ever set foot in here. That's our target audience, but I don't think we'll ever get to them because we're a little, she and I can be a little in your face about stuff. Like, for example, there was someone walking through here who was obviously, I hate to say obviously, wasn't aligned with a lot of the beliefs here, but I could kind of infer that by some of the things he was wearing. And so like when he was in the gift shop, I was just like, do you want to read this book about how Rosa Parks was a sexual assault investigator? Or, hey, did you know she's on the board for Planned Parenthood? Like, just make you as uncomfortable as possible because you walked in here. We get a kick out of that. But I mean, that's also our target audience too, really. I mean, that should be our target audience. That and students of all age, you know, educational background and everything.
Well, and that could be something that becomes a target for the online content. To say those who probably would never step foot in the museum, what can we do to tell the story and at least address some issues in a virtual space that we may never get a chance to deal with face to face.
I find that kind of funny because in my head, I'm picturing like doing an ad on one of our Facebook posts, and you can actually target people with specific interests. So like, I guess I could type in there like an interest in Nazi Germany or, you know, the KKK, and see what happens, and just target those people and spend like $50 and really get in their heads every time they get on Facebook. That would be really funny. But it would be a good time for me, I guess. Yeah, the other thing that we really want to do, even though we have these virtual tours, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Matterport, but it's a software system where you can either do it on like an iPhone or buy one of these fancy cameras that does like a 360 view of a room. And it does it 3D, and you can click on certain points and it will like zoom in on it. So we're hoping to do that to actually be able to put this online to some extent, where I don't have to walk people through, or my colleagues don't have to physically walk people through, because we do have to close down the museum for this. And on the business side of things, closing down for any unexpected visitors never a great idea, but
Well, and we do appreciate you taking the time to do this today, even though we know you're only getting a few visitors per day right now, but still,
no problem.
you've done a great service. And
Yeah, I don't mean y'all. Sorry, I don't mean y'all. I mean like other virtual tours that we do like every day, like around lunch. So like early in the morning's fine. Yeah, definitely don't mean you guys though.
well, and you do have a Facebook page that this class can like, correct?
Yeah, so we have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where I believe the Facebook is like Rosa Parks Troy University's Rosa Parks Museum, but then the Instagram and Twitter are just at Rosa Parks Museum. If you have any like questions for me, because I know that I did, and I know this is going online, so I'm saying it again. I did say some stuff from an individual perspective and not as the institution, but as a museum professional. My Instagram and Twitter is, hold on. My Instagram is at Madeline in museums, and then my Twitter is at Mad in museums. Yeah, if you have any questions, or you guys, or you have my email, which I don't mind being given out either.
Yeah, I can send that to the class. Are there any other questions? Well,
Sure.
this has been a very insightful tour of the museum, as well as what you're kind of thinking about as issues with the museum and opportunities with the museum to further engage in dialogue about these issues and different ways that the museum might be able to evolve, as you've talked about being at the very beginning of that process. So it's very interesting to hear that perspective, especially because if any of us went through the museum by ourselves, there's all of that information that we would get just going through on our own.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we do a really great job of giving the general overview of the bus boycott, the full 382 days. But I do think, we need to delve deeper, and people are begging for us to delve deeper into, individual stories. And it's past time that we do so. Like, museums answer to the public, really. And a lot of places need to realize that, that you don't answer to your donors necessarily. I mean, yes and no, but you also got to answer to the people who may never come in your doors, but find you on Facebook or read articles about you. So we just need to do a better, just a bigger digging into the things that we have to tell a more complete narrative, I think.
Well, on behalf of the class, we greatly appreciate your time and all of the insight you've given us, and plenty to think about and play with, especially as we continue talking about different museums. Our next speaker is actually going to be talking about the Transportation Museum. So yeah,
Cool.
we greatly appreciate your time and giving us a little bit of the behind the scenes of what you're thinking about doing with the museum in the future.
Yeah, and again, that's what I'm thinking about, and we don't know what's going to happen with that because we have not been really involved in the discussion of anything. Which, if you guys want to go into exhibition development, I beg you, talk to the educators at the museum and the curators. I beg you, because we're on the ground. So yeah, that was me speaking as an individual.
All right, well, we're just about out of time, so I'll stick around in case any of the students have any questions, but if not, we greatly appreciate it. And I'll be, as soon as I get the video for this, I'll be sending it to our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, and I'll include you on that, so you have a copy of this as well.
Okay, cool, thank you. Yeah, I hope that was helpful in any way. So yeah, let me know if you need anything from us. We're here.
All right.
All right, guys.
Thank you
Well,
so much.
Thanks.
That's all we have for
Sure.
today.
Thank
So I will see you all next time, and thank you, Madeline.
Sure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, guys. Yeah. I always forget how to do this, I swear.